my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to LGBTQ Live with myself, Mick FitzGerald, and today we are delighted to say we have a very special guest in the studio with us today, Noah Halpin. Noah, welcome to not only to Dublin City FM but East Wall and LGBTQ Live as well.
Thank you for having me in, Mick.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to start off by saying you've got a few fans out there in Western Australia. Would you like to just say hello to them in the expectation that they are listening?
Yeah, I know a few of the friends and family were looking into how to listen today, so I think my cousins Tanya and Rory and Adrian and Lee might be listening in, so hi to them if they are.
Or as we would say, because you can always say it late at night as well, g'day.
G'day, mate.
you spent a bit of time out there yourself.
I did, yeah. I moved out there in 2013, like a lot of young Irish people do to get away. And I lived in Perth in Western Australia with my cousins there for about a year, and then up in Darwin for a few months.
Yeah. Did you plan to stay there, or was it just a working holiday sort of thing? Or?
It was a working holiday with a view to kind of having a look, see if if it suits me. And I have thought about it a lot, but I think I am a bit of a home bird.
Yeah, because Perth, I mean, you picked the two extremes. I mean, I've spent nearly 20 years in Australia. I've never been to Perth. I've never been to Darwin, mainly because they were just so bloody far away, you know.
Oh yeah, like going from one side of Australia to the other, you know, flying from Perth to Brizzy is almost a long haul flight, so...
Yeah, well, I used to remind people, you know, the Sydney to Perth was the same distance as Dublin to Istanbul.
Oh God,
you know,
yeah.
And you know, so it's 4 days or something on the train, you know, which it's great if you really like trains, but you know, it is a schlep. That's all I can say.
Yeah, like not like popping to Kerry for the weekend.
No, you know, I was there in the 80s and 90s, which is obviously a different time, and it was. Compared to the LGBT scene that I left, which was pretty much non-existent in Dublin, Sydney in the 80s, until HIV came in, oh, it was just heaven. It was absolute heaven. It was an extraordinary place to see, because the LGBT scene was just gaining that sort of confidence. You know, we had, and then you got... Sydney Mardi Gras, and if you ever get a chance, go to it.
Oh, I'd love to, but no, I think you're right about the scene there in Sydney. I always loved that. Like, I mean, you've one street where you've got 5 or 6...
Oxford Street.
So, yeah, bars, you know, you finish in the Stonewall over there, and then you go across to, I think it's called Arc, if I remember correctly, and it's open till about 7 a.m. It's like nothing we have here.
Yeah, well, they used to have a place called the Taxi Club, which... originally was for taxi drivers because they work odd shifts, and then it pretty much became you know, one of the great LGBT places, and Sunday night was always trans night.
Right.
You know, it was actually trans and Aboriginal night. It was a strange mixture. And downstairs you had the slot machines, and upstairs, you could dance to your heart's content, and it was just... it's not there anymore, unfortunately, but it was just fabulous. I've got so many great memories of all of that. But I was younger then, though. Tell us, you've become a bit of I won't say a personality, but you've become a name through your exposure on RTE. What was your background originally? What was it like growing up in Dublin for you?
Yeah, well, I'll use... famous words of our great Panty Bliss is that I kind of became an accidental activist. You know, growing up in Dublin, it was, you know, I always knew there was something a little bit different about me. I preferred to play with the boys. Football was my thing. Rugby, I played all my life. You know, I went to a co-ed primary school, which was great. But then I was sent to an all-girls boarding school.
Was that traumatic?
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
Even though you went, we won't mention the school, but you mentioned it to me beforehand, and it's a very respectable school. It's a very well.
It's a great school.
It's a very well considered school,
Yeah.
and not necessarily a cheap school either.
No, it is a fabulous school, and the staff there were incredible. It just wasn't the right environment for me. I kind of, although I always knew there was something different, it wasn't until I was about 14 or 15 when I watched a documentary about a young trans girl that, the light bulb went on, and I said, oh, I know what I am, because, you're toying with it for a long time, saying, am I gay? Am I bi? Is this? And I didn't have a word for it, and I couldn't articulate it until I watched this, and I realised exactly what it was and what I was. But still, I was stuck in this all-girls boarding school, and like I said, although it was a great one, it was a difficult environment for me, and there was no way I could have come out in that situation.
Does that become isolating, or did you have friends or or fellow students that you could relate to and share with?
No, I didn't really. I had about 2 close friends whilst I was there. We were kind of the alternative group.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So I did have about 2 close friends there, but I spent most of my time out in the sports pitches, out on the football pitch, in detention, you name it.
Yeah. Under such circumstances, though, it must be easier to just say, I'm a lesbian. Because that way, sooner or later you'll get people who say that's okay, and then sooner or later you'll get people who say, oh, so am I, but trans is different.
Yeah, it is. And even back when I was in school, I don't recall anyone being out, even as gay when I was in school. So, to come out as trans, maybe, how long ago was I in school now? God, let's say about 15 years ago. It still wasn't something. So we're talking
about the mid noughties there.
Yeah,
yeah.
Still wasn't something I could.
Yeah.
Do well, early to mid noughties. Yeah.
No, I mean, I've been covering LGBT as on radio for the best part of 20 years, and the first time I ever really covered trans was about 2009, and that was when I came across, well, first of all, the movie Alfred Nobbs. If you and as a result of that, I contacted TENI, who in turn put me on to Vanessa.
Yeah.
So that was the genesis with, if you like, me covering it professionally. But I can't recall too much before that. I mean, before that, trans was portrayed as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, on the Australian theme, but that was transvestite. It wasn't trans in that sense of the word. So I think I can empathise with you in that sense of the word, that there wasn't, whatever about for yourself, there wasn't really too many benchmarks for other people to relate to.
No, and I don't remember anybody when I was, growing up, and when I kind of realised who I was, I can't recall any. I didn't know any trans people. For me, there was no kind of visibility there. I couldn't, the first trans person in the public eye that I came across was Laverne Cox, and she's relatively recent.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Relatively recently famous. So even then, when did I start? That's good.
So you never came across April Ashley or people like that?
No.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a different generation. I mean, April was even older than myself.
Right.
But no, I would agree with you. I mean, transvestite, people were known for that, but generally it was kept quiet. It was a lifestyle that was practiced in private. There were, other than those who were on the stage. So I'll be honest again. Other than the people I knew, and I mentioned this to you earlier, the earliest people I knew who were trans in the sense of taking hormones and doing body change was in Australia, and they were all sex workers because, as we say, you had to earn a living, and that was the only environment that was acceptable.
Yeah, and I know, I know trans people do have a very, very low employment rate, but I know that trans women in particular find it difficult to find employment in something that they'd like to work in. So I understand what you're saying from that point of view, and I think that's still very much the case in some parts of the United States as well, especially for trans women of colour, who experience a profound amount of violence and
just discrimination.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting because, again, going back to my knowledge and experience, if you like, the place that was always most identified with trans was Brazil, and yet Brazil is the place where trans people are the most likely to be in danger.
Exactly. Yeah. Brazil, I know, and especially now at the moment, has gotten particularly dangerous, and I know there's a lot of trans misogyny over there at the moment, and we're seeing countless reports of again trans women especially being murdered. So
well, let's step back a bit then, Noah. First of all, I love the name. I mean, why did you pick Noah?
I've always liked the name Noah, and I'm not sure why, but I felt when I knew how long it was going to take to get medical treatment, I felt that for me, I wanted a soft name, something that would suit me before I start medically transitioning, and something that will still suit me afterwards. And I thought Noah was quite a soft name. So
most people know the story, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of thought that the name Noah, you won't get too many double looks pre-medical transition if you tell them your name, whereas if I were to tell them my name was Michael before medically transitioning, I'd get a few funny looks. So yeah, no, for me, I've always liked it, and I thought it was quite a soft name as well.
Yeah, you don't get people turning around and saying, "Oh no, are you Jewish?"
No, though I did have a woman hand me a Bible verse in work recently.
Look, you got to admire them. That's all I can say. Yeah. So, at that, you get out of school and maybe you do a bit. At what point did you say, I have to action this? This is something, I'm not going to just hold in. This is a step that I've got to take. And it's perhaps an irreversible step, but this is a step that you had to adopt.
It was between, I think, the ages of kind of 21 and 23. I felt my mental health was slipping massively. And I was going downhill very, very fast, and I was aware of it.
Were you living at home at the time?
I was living. Yeah, I was. I was living with my dad at the time, and I felt things. I felt my head just it wasn't in the right place. I was very down, and I said I need to do something about this. And I spoke to someone, and like I'd always encourage people, if they're feeling the same way, always go seek someone out to speak to. And we kind of, through conversation, I decided, no, it is time, this is what I have to do, this is what's holding me back. And it was it was one night in the famous Charlie's on Georgia Street after a night out in the George that I pulled my friend aside, Michael, and I said to him, we were both very drunk, and I said, Michael, I'm trans. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah, I just needed to tell someone. And he just looked at me and he goes, okay. And it kind of went from there. And it went from there. And I told more people and more people. And I told all my friends first, and that was fine, everything, no problems there. And it was my family that I told last. And then I kind of set about doing my legal changes, such as the gender recognition certificate, name changes, and got myself onto that notorious list for HRT immediately.
So when you say you mentioned it to somebody, was that somebody you knew socially, or was it somebody who was professional?
At first?
Yes.
Oh, professional. I went to see a counsellor when I felt my mental health was slipping. I went to see a counsellor, and we kind of, between us, came to the conclusion that I needed to come out, and that's probably most likely.
So they didn't try and persuade you that you might be gay, or you might be bi?
They explored that. Now I was lucky that just by pure chance. The person I was seeing, he was a member of the LGBT community himself, so he was very aware. And we did explore it, and I was very adamant. I said, I'm not. I'm pretty sure I'm not, and I'm almost certain that I am trans. And you know, when we explored it more, we kind of came to the conclusion that, you know, it's probably because you haven't told anybody and you're not living.
And what about, I mean, how long ago are we talking there, I know?
How old am I now? Just about 28, so I would have been about 22 at this point.
So it's about 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay. Because at that stage, there were two organisations, now they're much more prominent now, that when anybody has ever come to me, I've said, this is who you need to talk to. And, you know, one is based on age and the other is based on, if you like, direction. First one would be TENI, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
And TENI, if you go back 6 years, TENI doesn't have the profile it had now, but that's changed dramatically, and particularly thanks to Broden. You know, who I can't praise high enough the job that Broden did in bringing trans to the fore.
Yeah,
was just remarkable. And the other, of course, is Belong To, but they weren't quite as oriented towards or set up to advise people about trans 6 years ago that they are now. Did you not even know about those organisations, or were you just starting to hear of them?
Well, it was only after, you know, I decided to come out that I started looking up these things. Now, by the time I came across Belong To, I was just aged out of their kind of system. But I did contact the wonderful TENI. I remember phoning and just asking a few questions about, you know, which way I should be pointed in terms of medical transition and things like that. And it's been wonderful. Like, TENI are such a fabulous organisation. They do so much for this community. You know, they do more than people know they do. And I've got a wonderful relationship with them now. But my first point of contact with them was when I was first coming out, and I did call, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was Gordon that answered the phone all those years ago, and kind of pointed me in the right direction as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly, for anybody listening to this who might feel they're in the same situation as yourself, whether it's male, whether it's female, it doesn't matter, the same principles apply. TENI, if you've got the slightest inclination that you're trans, I would say TENI is the first port of call.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And not even just for the person themselves, but maybe their family and their friends. You know, TENI do fabulous work, not only support-wise for trans people, with you know, a lot of their support groups, but also education-wise. You know, we know they're great at going around schools and businesses, educating en masse about trans issues.
Yeah, no, something to about, I think it would be in about 2015 or thereabouts, and I can't quite recall whether it was before or after the legislation was passed, but a friend of mine who would probably be one of the most intelligent people I know, he was a scholar at Trinity and all of this, and he was involved with the Dublin Fringe Festival. And they were putting on a gig at the end of it called Hootenanny, and he asked me, you know, what charity do you think we're going to do a charity gig? What should we do it for? And I said, well, why don't you do TENI? And he said, never thought of that, but because I was with TENI at the time. Every year since then, he has come to me and said, thank you so much, because the people I met through that are some of the most remarkable people. And this was mainly, it wasn't the people working in the office, this was mainly people in the trans community, people like Claire, people like Sarah, you know.
Wonderful, wonderful women,
and I think that's the really important thing, is that trans is people. It's not just a concept. It's not just a label. And I think that the more you can do that, and the more people can engage with you, the better understanding we get.
I think so, and I think what's, you know, a reason that we have such wonderful, you know, people in the trans community, like, namely, like you said there, like Sarah Phillips and Claire, is that a lot of the time trans people need to fight for everything they get. You know, we have a system here that we're almost set up for failure, so it takes a lot of fighting. So trans people tend to be very resilient as it is. And that's where you get such wonderful people, like you just mentioned there. It's not an easy life to navigate through, but I think it makes us resilient, it makes us strong, and something we're very, very good at is fighting.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's very important that people understand trans is a community.
Yes.
Trans isn't just a collection of individuals. I mean, and again, another person who I haven't mentioned, but it was probably the first trans person I met was Linda.
Yeah.
And I can remember Linda was on RTE, and Linda is Linda. Linda is fabulous, and Linda does not pretend to be anything other than who she is. And I remember for the first couple of years when Linda was prominent, because Linda was the only one that would appear in media and all of that. People were not empathetic towards Linda, but basically there was a bit of sniggering behind her back. Now, Linda's been one of the most resilient people I have ever met.
Linda's at everything.
She has been a torch carrier, hasn't she?
Oh, Linda's wonderful. Linda has such a great presence amongst the community. She turns up for everything. She's involved in everything. And I think the younger generation of trans people have to thank people like Linda a lot for
massively.
are relatively easier lives than what she may have had growing up, and especially people as well like Lydia Foy, who was an absolute hero of our community here in Ireland.
No, I agree. Now, the legislation was passed in 2015. It came fairly soon after the marriage equality, and I won't say it dovetailed on that, but that helped. But what I always remember about that time was because what they were proposing, what Joanna Tuffy and Joan Burton were proposing, was nothing like what eventually came in. That we have to thank Kevin Humphreys largely for that. What was your how much in the centre of that were you, or were you more peripheral when that was happening? Or
I was more peripheral when that was happening for the reason I was very, very newly out. And my parents still didn't know at that point, so I couldn't really put myself in any central position during that time. However, I was always following it. I was always knew what was going on, but I was very much in the background at that point. And it was only pretty much, like I said, a bit, as Panty Bliss says, a bit of an accidental activist when I tried to access things like healthcare, and when I really found out what it was like, it upset me to the point where I was seeing other people going through extremely hard times just trying to access something like basic healthcare, and that's what made me really angry.
Well, again, and it's interesting because the first time I encountered yourself was last summer during the Trans Pride march, and you made a very important address there, which I've got on video. And what was very interesting about yours was one of the least political, but you raised an incredibly important point, and that was that it's all very well to change legislation that gets you a certificate, but if you do not put in the infrastructure to support that certificate, and the infrastructure is largely medical, then you're just creating another series of problems. How important do you think that point is, and how easy is it to access those services?
Well, the point, to be told that we can self-identify.
That's great, but
on paper.
Yeah.
But then say the opposite when it comes to healthcare. So they can say you can change your gender legally, no problem, but you need permission to transition medically. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So ideally we'd like a model of informed consent. The World Health Organization declassified trans identities as mental health or behavioural disorders last year. However, we're still working off this psychiatric model of care where we need to be psychiatrically diagnosed before we're considered to even be given hormone treatment, or sent for surgery abroad because we don't have.
We don't have it here. We don't even have the practitioners, do we?
We don't have. For a lot of gender affirmation surgeries, we don't have any surgeons in Ireland that do it. So.
Is that changing, or is it like everything here? It happens at a snail's pace.
We're seeing the HSE and politicians being a little bit more open to listening, and a little bit more open to change. And I know TENI as well are doing a lot of work in the background there as well. We're hoping things are going to start changing. Earlier in the year, you know, Simon Harris did announce for a number of new positions in the trans healthcare sector. However, they've not quite happened just yet. But I think the most important thing to change is the model of care. Once the model of care changes, that opens up trans healthcare in Ireland and makes it more accessible. Instead of people waiting on these 26, 27 month long waiting lists.
You were involved in the RTE programme. What's your feeling about it afterwards? Did you find it intrusive?
I expected it from the advertisement. I expected it to be bad. However, I didn't expect it to be as bad as it actually was. There was a lot of misinformation that went out. A lot of misinformation.
Deliberately or through ignorance?
I think mainly through ignorance and what I would consider like lazy journalism. You know, they had to import a debate that was happening over in the UK, a debate we've never had and don't need to have. There's no appetite for it here in Ireland.
This is the turfs.
There's no appetite for that here. And, you know, a lot of misinformation about the Gender Recognition Act review went out. A lot of misinformation that muddied the waters between medical and legal transition. I know it stated that, on the show, it stated that trans children will be able to change their gender legally without parental consent. However, the proposal or the recommendations of the Gender Recognition Act review state that, you know, parental consent is integral in children changing their gender identity.
Yeah, I mean, and then we had Graham Lenihan bringing in the old, oh well, I couldn't go to a bathroom because Noah might fancy me. I think you'd be fairly safe, Graham.
Look, it's you know what, it's rage bait kind of reporting at its finest. You know, let's find the most outspoken person we can who has some sort of media presence, and he was invited on. He gave some horrible information, well, his ideas. And, you know, I don't like to comment much on him. It's more about educating people about the actual needs of the trans community at the moment.
No, unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been a delight talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me in.
You will always be welcome back. If you've got anything happening, anything point you make, just give us a call and you'll be always welcome on LGBTQ Live.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.